Hey everyone, Gary here from Echidna Sewing, and today I'm going to dig into how you use silicone oil to rejuvenate your sewing and embroidery threads. Lots of questions all the time from people about silicone spray and oils and why we would have it in our sewing room, and particularly why we use it on sewing threads and more importantly embroidery threads. Well, let me tell you, silicone has been used in the clothing and the apparel and the thread and the textile industry for so long, and it's a vital part of making threads work. In fact, most thread, when it's manufactured, certainly embroidery threads, are lubricated with silicone during the manufacturing process. And the problem with that is over time the thread, the oil, will actually dry out and evaporate or disappear out of the thread. And if you've been an embroiderer for a while, you'll know sometimes some threads just pull really, really tightly through the machine. They don't stitch very nicely. And you know, they can cause thread breakage and all sorts of things. And more often than not, that's because the thread is dry and it is just dragging through the machine. So I'm going to show you the three different types of silicone options that you have and how you would use them, and tell you what I think is the best option. So the first one I'm going to look at is the pump action spray, and this is the one that uses the isopropyl alcohol mixed with the silicone oil. And to show you how this works, I'm going to do a couple of things. First, I'm just going to spray a little bit onto this little piece of notepad paper or a post-it note, and you'll see when I do this, and I've chosen this colour so you can see it clearly on camera, give it a bit of a shake, mix it all around, and I'm going to give it a couple of pumps like that, and hopefully the camera can pick that up, and you can see it looks like we've sprayed quite a bit of oil on there. We're going to leave that sit for a moment, and I'm also going to spray an equal amount onto this baking paper. So the baking paper isn't going to absorb the oil like this paper will, so we'll do that. Spray that, 2 quick sprays onto there. You probably can't see that because it's on white paper. I'll come back to that. And to use that on your thread, let's just take this thread here. What we would do, this is just a Hemingworth spool, and putting silicone on threads will apply to any brand of thread, because if it dries out it's still going to give you grief. But to do it on the thread, it's just a matter of a little bit of a spray around there, and you'll notice the thread does change colour. Well, that's just the liquid of the alcohol that makes it change colour. It will go back to exactly the same colour when it's dried, when the alcohol's dissipated, and it will leave a fine coating of silicone oil on the thread. So pretty simple, just spray it, let it sit. Good idea to let it sit for even overnight, it's a good option. So that's how easy that is to use. It's not terribly messy, it doesn't go everywhere like the aerosol can, but you know, it's better than nothing, but it's the least of my preferred 3 options. So let's pop that out the way, and now let's take a look at number 2, which is the aerosol can. Now my second option is the good old trusty aerosol can of silicone spray, and this is the Halmar product. It's really a really good product, easily accessible from most craft stores and a lot of hardware stores. It's a bit difficult in the sense that we can't easily ship this because it is categorised as a dangerous goods and we can't ship it through normal Australia Post, but nonetheless it's fairly readily available. It is an aerosol, so you don't really want to be spraying this in a closed environment or getting the spray everywhere. It uses hydrocarbons as the propellant. And what I'm going to do first up is take another piece of my blue paper. Now remember, I did one with the pump spray just before. I'm going to give this a quick squirt on the blue paper, and we'll leave that sitting there. And I'm also going to put a bit on this baking paper, and we'll leave that sitting there for a moment. Now, in order to lubricate your thread with a silicone spray, it is a good idea to take it outside or out into an open area where you're not going to be ingesting any of the flames, or the flames, they're not flames, they're fumes, we'll get it right in a minute. Another good thing you can do though is get a very sophisticated spray booth. Now we're using one of our little Echidna boxes here, I'm sure you've got something similar. And if I was wanting to, I might use the white thread actually for that one. No, I'll use the purple. Pop that back there because you'll see it a bit better I think. Now I'm going to be going back to front here, and all you would do with this is give that a spray, turn it around a bit, another spray there, and a good liberal coating. And there you go, you've kind of sprayed the thread, and you would want to let that sort of come back to colour. It goes a bit darker. Don't worry about that, because that's just the fluidity of the hydrocarbons, and that will dissipate and the thread will come back to normal colour, and oil that'll be left on there is the silicone oil. So there's your aerosol can. The other option is the pure silicone oil. This is my preferred option, and when I was way back in the years when I was working in the clothing industry, we used silicone oil all the time, and we used it to bring thread back to life. We used it to help thread work better on different machines, and sometimes it was just an essential part of the manufacturing process. I've got a little bottle that I've already opened here, and the good news is we're now shipping the 125ml bottles rather than the 100ml bottles. So, but I'll just use this one as I have it open. Now, first thing I'm going to do is grab a piece of my paper again. Pop a little bit of, and I'm only going to put a smallest little dollop of oil on there, and I'm just going to smear that around to get basically the same size that I got from the sprays. So there we go, we've got that there now. Just wipe my finger there. It is silicone, it's not dangerous to you. And I'll put another little piece on here, little dollop there, and I'll spread that around similarly to the same size as I got from the sprays. We'll let that sit, do its thing. I'll let these papers sit and do their thing, and we'll take a spool of thread here. We'll just take this orange thread, and this is just a polyester embroidery thread, a Hemingworth. Now what we do with silicone oil is, instead of spraying it, instead of having a pump action or an aerosol can, it's just running little beads of oil like this around the spool. Just little tiny beads. You can do 4 or 5. Bigger the bead, the less you probably need, but that's got a few nice beads of oil around there, and then you can just gently rub that around. Good idea to have a little towel or tissues or something beside you when you're doing this. Now it does look like it's changed colour, but it hasn't. It's just that it appears wet now, and it is with oil, silicone oil, and we're just going to let that sit. Now what I would do with that spool now is let it sit overnight. That's ideally what you should do, but you know, even let it sit for half an hour would be fine, and that will absorb in. Now what happens with the pure oil, there's no other additives in there. There's no hydrocarbons, there's no propellants, there's no alcohol. It's just pure oil, and that will absorb in like a wick right into that spool of thread, and it just changes the performance of the thread like you would not believe. And the good thing about this one is it's easy to ship. We can ship that in our normal Australia Post parcels, and it goes a long way. You don't really use that much of it, but that is an absolute must-have in your sewing room, and it just works better. Now, interestingly, let's look at the little bits of paper that I sprayed just a few moments ago. This was the pump action spray. Hopefully the camera's got that. There's the faintest little bit of a stain of oil here, but most of what got wet there was the isopropyl alcohol that was used to actually pump the oil onto the paper. There's actually very little silicone oil on that piece of paper at all. And so you really do have to use a fair bit of that to leave any residual oil on the spool. And that's kind of proof of that concept. The next one was the aerosol can. Now it delivered a bit more oil. You can see that there's quite a stain there, and that's the oil stain that's left there. But there's really no oil residually left on the paper of any substance, but it certainly did carry more oil than the pump action spray. And then the third one was the actual oil itself, the pure oil. And that is still slippery as it's gone through the paper, so it's absorbed through there, but it's still all there. And that means that when that absorbs into the spool of thread, you're getting oil where it needs to go. It is getting on the thread, it's absorbing into the fibers and the yarn, and it's going to lubricate the thread. And honestly, it just brings a spool of thread beautifully back to life. Now I'm going to now have a look at what we've got on the the baking paper. And what I can see on the first spray up here, there's a little bit of residual oil. There's still a bit of alcohol sitting there. That's the little bubble there. That's just pure isopropyl alcohol. But I can see there's a light coating of oil, and it's a little bit smeary and sticky and slippery. And so it's okay, and it's easier to see from my angle here on the baking paper. The second one was the aerosol spray, and that's definitely delivered more oil. I can see that. And those little bubbles you see there, that is actually oil. That's silicone oil. But it kind of didn't carry as much oil as you might think. So you've got to give it a really good spray to make sure you do leave a fair bit of oil on the thread when you're doing it on thread. The next one is the pure oil, and that is just still perfectly there. The amount of oil I put on there is still there. So again, those little dollops of oil will go a long way on your thread spool. So that kind of shows it in a practical sense. Now, the next question people will ask is, can I use silicone oils on my metallic threads? Yes, you can. So here's a spool of one of our soft light metallics. In fact, I'll get a smaller one. We'll get this one, it might be easier to see. This is a Hemingworth metallic, and the same rules apply, just a little dollop. Now, to be honest, you don't need as much on here because it's a metallic thread. The oil actually sits on top of the metallic thread more than it sits in it. So metallic threads are really that. They're a metallic yarn that is wound around usually a viscose center or a polyester center, and you would only need a few little beads of oil around that to bring that perfectly back to life. You certainly don't need as much. So metallics are okay, and then any other sewing thread. If it's not performing, and as you're pulling it through the machine, if it's really feeling tight and raspy and not delivering really well, and you've got your threading correct and everything's fine, then a bit of silicone will work wonders. It really will. So I hope that that explains it in some detail for you. Again, my preferred option is the silicone, the pure oil in the little 125ml tub or bottle, and readily available on our website, and I'm sure you can get pure silicone oil pretty much anywhere. If you are buying it and it's not this brand, just make sure it's food grade and it is silicone oil, because that's what you need. And but this brand, Halmar, do make a fantastic product. So until next time, happy sewing and embroidering.